It's another time with Tutor Ayo, the Entrepreneurship tutor. And in today's tutorial happens to be the very first class we are having on the course, CSS234. And today's tutorial basically it's more of a like a continuation on the term security. In the previous classes we spoke about the principles and the management development of security. But in today's tutorial, in this course, it's more of the management, right? It's more of the I beg your pardon, it's more of the principles, what security is all about. But in our previous classes we had the industrial security, that's security at large. Now we want to be talking about security, we want to break down what security is all about and how it emanated. That is what we are doing in this course. With this being said, let's go straight into it. Okay, so we have CSS43, right? CSS2 234, CSS234. And to start with, we will speak about what the term security means. All right, the course code is CSS243. That's the course code, and it's all about security. All right, principles. Now let's start with the definition of what security is. Okay, let's start with what the definition of security. Now when we say security, what does it mean? In our previous class we have established on the fact that any activity that involves whether group or personal, organization or institutional, any activity that has to do with the protection of life and properties, okay, then we are talking about security. In as much as these activities involve the protection of life and property, okay, it could be by an individual, it could be by a group of people, whether paid or volunteers. All right, any of these activity that involves the protection of life and property, then we are talking about security. And we've also established the fact that security has gone beyond leaving this responsibility just to the government. All right, although it is the sole responsibility of the state to protect our citizen. Okay, and like we have been made to understand by great political thinkers that the moment a government or a state cannot protect a citizen, then if citizens resort to violence in protecting themselves, then they have the right and liberty to do that. All right, when we talk of social contract, we establish the fact that the only reason why there is peace and order according to social contracts made us understand that the citizens are submitted their rights, all right, their sovereignty, their use of authority and power to the state as a collective effort. Then the state in return now has the responsibility of protecting our citizens. Okay, and that is what put an end to what Thomas Hobbes said about the natural state of man, which he emphasized on man being brutish, selfish, and very, very wicked. Okay, but as a result of the social contract theory now, that we are now submitting our individual right, individual authority, and use of power to the government, to the states, okay, so that the state can collectively protect everybody. Okay, so now what are we now saying in essence? We are still talking about security, and we have established the fact that security, any activity, doesn't matter who is involved in the activity, but in as much as the activity, the end result of this activity is to protect life and property, then we are talking about security. So now let's look at what it means in a layman term. All right, a layman definition of security is a protection of life and property. Security, layman, the protection of life, and properties. Okay. Please, if you're on this stream, do well to say hello, hi, or something so we can acknowledge your presence. All right. And please, if there's something you don't get, please do well to use the comment section to ask your question. Now, the concept of security has undergone a transition from what we call traditional conceptualization. And please, if you are new on this stream, do well to smash the like button. Okay? Do well to smash the like button. And if you are here to subscribe to the channel, also consider subscribing. It's free. All right? Now, it has undergone all right, it has gone past that level of traditional conceptualization. Traditional conceptualization and to non-traditional conceptualization. Okay, now we're going to explain this in details, what it means by the traditional and the non-traditional conceptualization. Now, when we say traditionally, okay, what does it mean? What is the concept of security traditionally? Now, speaking of which, traditionally, security management was the unilateral function of the state. All right, like I said earlier, the unilateral function, traditionally speaking now, traditionally, all right, security is the unilateral function of the states, okay, whereby the state is charged with the sole responsibility of protecting our citizens, just like what Thomas Hobbes, who argued, all right, Thomas Hobbes argued that the essence of the states, like what I said earlier, that the essence, the reason why we have the states, the reason why we have a government running the state, all right, is because the state provide law and order which are attained through security management. Now, speaking of the non-traditional, all right, the non-traditional has to do with, like what I said, it has gone beyond the responsibility of the government alone to provide security in a state. And that's why we can see a lot of private organizations doing that, and even some locally organized security groups, all right, all with the intention of achieving one goal: protect life and property. That is what the non-traditional of security transition means. Now, there are basically types of security, okay? So let's take non-traditional. The taking up of security functions by members, all right, of the state. So it could be individual, it could be group, or what have you, all right, and what have you. Okay, so we have that as that. So now let's talk about the types of security. Okay, the types. There are basically types of security, and we're going to be mentioning just but a few. We have the likes of food security, all right? We have the likes of food security that has to do with the protection of farm produce. All right, and by doing this, it could be not allowing citizens to depend too much on exports, all right, and encouraging citizens to focus more on food produce produced in the state, all right, locally produced food and farm produce, rather than depending on imported ones so much, all right. So that's one thing about that. And it's, like I said, protection of farm produce, and this has to do with regulating imports and exports, right? And also providing securities for farmers, right? Everything that has to do with the protection of farm produce, anything that has to do with food in the state, all right? And it can also regulating imports and exports, and also checkmating, all right, governmental bodies responsible for checkmating what is being consumed in the state, all right. We have the like of NAFDAC, all right, all of them checkmating the quality, the quality, the quantity control, and the likes. Okay, basically all that falls under food security. The hygiene, for production organizations, how hygienic are they? Are they observing all the necessary precautions when it comes to producing their products, considering the fact that they produce what the citizens consumes? All this has to be put in check. Also, we have the health security. All right, that's two. Health security. Now, this has to do with, this involves safety against HIV and AIDS, pandemics, and other diseases like malaria, all right, that account for very high mortality rates, all right. Everything, all the activity that has to do with the protection of the citizen from deadly diseases, all right. Involved in the protection of citizens from deadly diseases, all right, from deadly disease, okay, from deadly diseases like HIV, we have AIDS, malaria, the pandemic, all right, and the likes. So we have that as that. We also have economic security. Now, economic security, this can be described as a way of putting in place measures and strategy that will ensure every individual in the state is not, all right, entitled to employment, but also has a right to a living wage. We have economic security. Now, this is the type of security that involves the state ensuring that every individual of that state, every citizen of that state or that country, okay, gets employed, all right, by every means necessary, and all right, employment and what we call living wage. Something like this is yet to happen in this country. All right, living wage and employment, full employment, whereby people can get to work the kind of work they want, not going for the available options only. So we have that is that. Now we have personal security. This type of security involves protecting every individual from physical violence. That's a personal security. Protecting every individual from what we call physical violence, from any form of physical, all right, from any form of physical violence. That's a personal security. So we have that as that. Like community security also, the form of security that they need to respect traditional relationship and society values. All right, the security that put into consideration, all right, respecting the traditional relationship and society values of the people by protecting people from losing such communitarian values. I think that's more of what one of the great African political thinkers, Nyerere did for Tanzania, all right? The communitarian value, instilling communitarian value in the new generations. And we have territorial security as well, security that has to do with the protection of the territory from external aggression. So now let's talk about violence. Enough of the types of security, and let's move into something else. And we're going to be talking about violence, what it means, and the types of violence that can occur. Let me just erase this. Take some points on that. Okay, so now speaking of which, violence, we're going to be looking at some series of definitions, all right, on the term. Okay, I think I just put it here. We're going to be looking at some series of definition on the term. Erase this. Okay, we're dissecting what it means by violence. Now, to start with, let's start with the definition of Arendt. All right, Arendt describes violence basically by focusing on its characteristics rather than the concept itself. All right, Arendt, all right, focused on the characteristics. What are the things that violence produce, not on the concept. Now, she said, all right, that violence interprets all right, it says violence is the intrusion of the utterly unexpected. All right, the intrusion of the utterly unexpected, according to her. Okay, now intrusion in the sense that when we say intrusion, we are simply talking about what just came out from nowhere. All right, you are not expecting, just came from nowhere and just turned the whole thing upside down. All right, an intrusion, and indeed it's an intrusion because most time the victim of violence might not really be expecting it. All right, from the utterly unexpected. So we have the Center for Disease and that's CDC, for Disease Control and Prevention. That's CDC, Center for Disease and Control Prevention. On this part, defined violence as injury inflicted by deliberate means. All right, CDC, injury inflicted by deliberate means. Okay, that's the CDC. Injury inflicted by deliberate means. All right, which include assault as well as legal intervention and self-harm. All right, according to CDC, includes assault, all right, and self-harm. That's what CDC said. Now, we also want to look at general definitions now, as we can regard violence as aggressive behavior that may be physically, sexually, or emotionally. All right, let's look at it like this. Aggressive, any aggressive behavior all right, aggressive behavior that may be what? Physically, that may be physically, all right, emotionally, all right, or sexually. Physically, emotionally, or sexually. Any of this aggressive behavior can be termed as violence. Okay, so we have that as that. Now let's continue. Okay. Now, emotionally, sexually abuse. There's an abuse here. Some scholars believe that it is only the government that possesses rights to the application of violence. All right. Some scholars is of the opinion that it's only government. All right. Some scholars are of the opinion that it is only the government that possesses, all right, possesses the right to the application of violence. All right, and it shouldn't be in all cases anyway. Some cases, not in all cases. Now, on the question of justification of violence, based on the justification now, what permits violence, Max Weber argued that the power of the state include the monopoly on the legislative use of physical force or violence within its identified territory. All right, so that's more of, it is true that it is only governments under the law that is justified to use violence, and it depends, all right, situation warrants, all right. It is not in all, we are not, since it's not a dictatorship, since it's not a dictatorship or a tyrant in power, all right, there are situations that warrant violence. It's not in all situations, all right. So power is so fundamental to the business of government, all right. Definitely power is fundamental to the business of government, all right. So you need to know that power is so fundamental to the business of government. So fundamental. Now, people can also carry out violence if the government fails to meet their yearnings, which from the basis of social contracts. Like, if you had not forgotten, I said something in regards of social contract. All right, that the reason why people are not taking law into their hand is because of social contract, meaning that people are submit their authority, all right, their power to carry out violence to the government, so that in exchange the government can protect the general interest of the citizens as citizens, and for those that are unruly, there's a punishment for them if they apply violence by taking the law into their hands. All right, so that has its foundation in what we call social contracts. But if the government fails, that's why sometimes we hear of coup, because the military will just feel like this administration is not doing well and things are getting out of hand, and before everything becomes terrible, let's take over. And you see, we experience them. Thank God things like that barely happen these days, but I mean, it's one of the things that make coup happen. All right, if the government fails to listen to the yearnings of the people, all right, then with my experience, that as a matter of fact, it is not only government that enjoys legitimacy of use of violence. Individuals can also enjoy such legitimate rights if there is justification for exhibiting the violence behavior. Just as government has the justification to exhibit violence, some individuals will also have in some, all right, in some situation warrants. So very quickly, we'll talk about some forms of violence, but in our next class we'll really hit the nail on the head about more points on the term violence. So now, when we say forms of violence, so forms okay, violent crimes, forms of violent crimes. Forms of violent crime. Violent crimes are any aggressive action which are outlawed or prohibited. Outlawed or prohibited by the law. All right, violent crimes as VC, any what? Aggressive action. Okay, any aggressive actions which are outlawed, meaning that the law is against such action, or prohibited by the law. All right, those are violent crimes. Now, violent crime can be classified into two. All right, violent crime can be classified into two. All right, and we have two. We have domestic, okay, and we have non-domestic. Domestic and non-domestic violence crime. Now, speaking of which, under domestic, okay, what are the things we have? And under non-domestic, what are the things we have? This we'll be discussing in our next class, as we will continue from domestic and non-domestic crimes. All right, so I believe you have been able to gain a thing or two into this class. Please, let's do also submit our notes to the appropriate quarters, and let's not forget, all right, We are gradually moving and the semester is counting down. Please take every of the classes to heart and do not miss any of them. Do also always revert back to the website whereby you can catch up with any of the classes you have missed. Thank you very much, everyone, and I look forward to seeing you all in subsequent tutorials. Do have a wonderful afternoon. Bye bye.